So everybody, thank you very much for coming. People are still rolling into the room, but feel free to just come in. We have tonight our tiny desk adventurer all the way from the Seychelles, which is a beautiful island in the Indian Ocean. I have been there for a day, but anyway, and I'd like to explore it more. So that's just a kind of side chat. But I want to welcome Sheena Talma to the room, to our little tiny desk adventure space, to tell us a little bit of, about her life and some of the stuff she does in the ocean, and just so people can get excited about a totally different area to the ones that we've been sort of talking about in the last few weeks. So welcome, Sheena, and thank you so much for being here with us. I am super, super stoked to have you.
Thanks, Asha. And I'm really looking forward to the day where we get to meet in person, because I think this is like, we have this virtual relationship and I haven't actually met you. So I'm really excited for when we actually get to, cross paths.
I totally agree. And you know what? Sometimes I think, like this, we were chatting, and I'm sure there are people who are like, oh, these guys must be like, friends, they must work together. And really, like, we've only really ever spoken, even virtually, once before, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So, but it's just that I think the key thing is that we're both women in science in the marine conservation space who want to ensure that we have the same ideals, right? We want to make sure that there's better representation in this space, not just women, but also people from underrepresented places. And I think that's a mission of Oceanswell. But also for those of you who have gone onto our website and looked at the guest Q&A from Sheena, that's one of the things she mentions is what kind of drives her as well. So I think it's easy to make friends and bond over things that are like so deep in the heart, right?
Yeah, for sure. Totally agree with you 100%. And I'm so happy to be able to be here tonight chatting with you. And I look forward to all the questions. Yeah, I'm a little bit scared as well, to be honest. But yeah, I'm really excited.
No reason to be scared. But okay, I'm going to kickstart. Okay, so your Time Desk Adventure video was about ichthyology, which I thought I loved because, we've had some amazing videos by our various dogs really loving having. I think he wants to be part of the conversation, right? Is that what happened?
Yeah, I'm trying to get my sister to like take him to a different room. So my sister is like my own private director, producer. She's fantastic.
She's awesome. So sister out there, thank you for helping with the video. That's a bit of a shout out. But yeah, so you talked about ichthyology, and I loved the video particularly because while we've had a range of really great videos from all our tiny desk adventures so far, this kind of had a different angle where you were talking more in depth of like a particular area in marine science, which I think is so valuable, especially for young people who want to go into the field and are like, oh, it's marine biology, just whales, right? And it's not. There's such a diversity. And then you show within ichthyology, there's even more diversity, right? So do you want to like tell us a little bit about why you kind of went into this?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So actually, I started my journey of really interested in animals, right? At some point I wanted to be a vet. So I guess lots of people who love animals also want to be vets. And then I started working on an island in the Seychelles. So the Seychelles has 115 islands. And this island's whole kind of ideals was to bring back what used to be there. Okay, so they wanted to rehabilitate it. And working there, I was only 16 during my holidays, and I fell in love with the fact that I could, growing up in the mountains, I could go from looking at frogs in my backyard to looking at turtles. I used to walk the beach and check out what turtles were there and mark nests and things like that. And then I started diving when I was 18 or 21, somewhere around those lines. And only then did I start falling in love with the ocean as much as I am now. So it wasn't always innate. In fact, I was a little bit scared of the sea. And my scholarship basically the idea was I could go and study anywhere as it had something to do with the environment, which I was passionate about. And the boss and my mentor at the time actually suggested that I go to one of the universities in South Africa, currently known as Rhodes, that is where the coelacanth, which is this amazing old, like, people thought it didn't exist anymore, fish, was discovered and described. So I was just like, okay, I'm doing it. So, hopped in a plane and started studying marine biology, actually, and then found out that that section that was offered was very much about mussels and, like, the intertidal zone, which is fabulous, but not for me. And then and
Such a
then fell in
diplomat.
love with yeah, and then there was ichthyology, which was offered at this university. And yeah, I was just, from then it challenged me from the first day I went into my class, and I stuck with it the whole way through.
That's amazing. So, okay, pause. Coelacanth. I think coelacanth is amazing. I mean, the coelacanth, like you say, we thought was extinct, and then it was refound.
Yeah.
It's cool because it was rediscovered by a woman, right?
Yes. Yeah, it was Courtney Latimer, who was in one of the coastal towns in South Africa, who saw this strange fish, and she was like, "Oh, this is weird," and then sent a drawing and a letter to this scientist who was actually a chemist at the university currently known as Rhodes, and basically was like, this is an interesting fish. And this guy, J.L.B. Smith, he was a fish enthusiast. He loved fish. He loved fishing. And his wife, Margaret Smith, was also really, really enthusiastic about fish. So he described it. But she was the one who found the fish and realized that there was something strange here. And yeah, and that's how that story came about. And in fact, they named the fish after her, Courtney Latimer. So the scientific name is after her, which is really
That's
cool.
cool. Yeah, that's very cool. And you know what? What's really cool about that, and I think people don't realize it, especially in the past when women went on expeditions, they had to dress as men because they weren't really allowed to. And women, in many cases, also would make discoveries, but men would then sort of like acquire the discovery and it would go under them. So it's nice that they honored her, and just the
Yeah.
fact that she was perceptive enough and alert enough and like
Yeah.
kind of knowledgeable enough that it was a different species, right? So that's
Definitely.
cool.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
ichthyology means you can kind of discover and once thought to be extinct fish, but there's lots of other things. What is it about? What specific areas of ichthyology or kind of fish biology do you really? What excites you?
So for me, I mean, the first time that I was exposed to the fact that there were fish in the deep sea was in my undergraduate years, so a couple years ago. And then, but still it's so far away. It's like foreign because you think, oh, I'm never gonna get there anyway, right? And then working with Necton, which is a really fabulous NGO, and I discovered, that you can get involved in getting to the deep sea and exploring the fish that live there. And that has a lot of implications, obviously. But one of the aspects, I guess, I have a growing love for the deep sea and the fish that you find there because it's just an unknown world. But I like the aspect of fisheries where you can mix people and fish together, because for me, that we can't make any changes to any dilemma that faces our environment unless us ourselves are involved in it. So I really enjoy that, like, multi dimension of being able to deal with people and fish or any kind of oceanic region, really.
Yeah, and I mean that's a really important point, and which people don't realize because a lot of the time people will think of conservation and they'll think about like that conservation is just protect a species or like the
Yeah.
ecosystem, but actually 99% of conservation is managing humans, right? Because if we're not managing them, we're not looking after their needs, making sure that they're safe and fed and have jobs and livelihoods, then
Yeah.
there's really no hope, right? So that's so key.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
Exactly. Yes.
Keep going.
No, I was just thinking, you know, if we don't have buy-in from people, then I don't know why are you doing
Yeah.
it.
No, exactly. And so do you work in like looking at deep sea fisheries as well? Is that an area that you work in?
Not at the moment. So, Necton's work is very much focused around exploring the deep sea. But in fact, the work that we did in the Seychelles went down to about 300 meters, which is only the tip of the deep sea, if you think about it. But a very interesting part because the Indian Ocean, especially the Seychelles, hasn't had a lot of systematic work that has looked at that specific area. And you know, the great thing about it is you get to have a first view, but also expose different people to that area and really try and make people understand that first and foremost, yes, we have the shallow regions, but we also have our deep sea. And I love that little phrase that says my deep sea, my backyard, which is one of the projects that Diva is involved in.
Yeah.
And I just love that it, you know, it brings your backyard, it brings the deep sea into your backyard and makes it feel like it's part of the system. So yeah, so I think one of the biggest things as well is that everything is linked. So whatever we do in the deep sea and the shallows are linked. So we have to
Absolutely.
think about it together and not as separate different systems.
Yeah. And I mean, so this is great because this is such a good time because last week, for those of you who missed it, we had Dr. Diva Amon, who is a deep sea
Mm-hmm.
biologist. And she came and spoke to us as well, which was really exciting. And just talking about the interconnectedness is an example, which we talk about in that live. So if you want to catch it, it'll be on our website shortly. But she said that in her research publication she just put out, they found plastic at a depth of
Mm.
6 kilometers. So just remember the shallows, the deep, land, and ocean, everything's connected. So whatever we're doing out here is definitely having impact out there, right? So don't feel like you're absolved by just because like
Yeah.
it's out of sight, out of mind. So that's really important. But
Yeah.
I'd love to know. Okay, so you've done the Necton Deep Sea First Ascent. Is that what it's called?
Yes. First ascent. Yeah.
Okay, so you
That's right.
went down in a submersible, which I am, as I told you, that very jealous about. But that's okay. I'm gonna manage my jealousy right now. Okay. But what is it that you felt like? You know, when you went down, like the first time, you know, what was it like?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people ask that question, and Dr. Diva has a lot more experience with this. But I was lucky to go in one of the nicer ones. So Dr. Diva explained that there are different types of submersibles. They're the ones that have like an acrylic globe, so you can see outside very nicely, almost for tourists. And then there's the really cramped ones. In fact, we were meant to do an expedition this year, which would have used one of those really cramped ones. But because of the situation, obviously, we had to postpone that. But what's really fabulous for me is so I said in the beginning that, in fact, when I was growing up, I loved the sea, but I was a little afraid. And one of the reasons for that was because I had an incident where I almost drowned. So there is always that, like, a little bit of fear, but you have to go past that if you love something, right? So for me, being in the sub, it's like it's very quiet, especially since we were on a big ship that was quite noisy. It's very quiet, and that's the first thing I remember. And you bobber on the surface for a little while, and then as you drop, it's like you're floating in the clouds. That's how I like to think about it. And it's like you're in a fishbowl because essentially all you see is you go down, and the fish are like they're all around you. So I think that's for me the image that always stays in my head is the fact that I feel like I'm in the bowl and everywhere else around me is like the world. Yeah, and it just for me it just renewed my passion for conservation and especially fisheries and fish here in the Seychelles.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful description. You're getting a lot of heart eyes from people because
Oh,
I think everyone's kind of
cute.
feeling it, and I think it's nice. It's such an apt description, and that's sort of how we almost want to view the world in general, I feel like when we're in wild spaces, we're the ones who should be trapped, right? And like the world should be free around us, so we can
Yeah.
really just watch the world as it is and not
Yeah.
interfere and interrupt and get in the way. And that's sort of key. So with the Necton expedition, I know you guys, you worked both in the Seychelles and the Maldives, right?
So for the last expedition, if the first descent, it was only in the Seychelles. The one we're going to do now, which was we were going to explore the Twilight Zone and Seamounts, was going to be Seychelles and Maldives. So unfortunately, that couldn't happen for now. So yeah, at the next point, perhaps.
Yeah, fingers are crossed. So Seamounts, what can you tell me about? Well, tell us about Seamounts.
Well, so I started reading up about seamounts when, part of this expedition and preparing for it. And the great thing about seamounts, as Dr. Diva said last week, is that essentially they're underwater mountains. And, they've got a diversity of life around it. And they're really important for fishing grounds. Because for me, how I like to think about it is, although the deep sea isn't a desert, there are pockets that might have more life than others, right? Just like on Earth, we might have a rainforest or a savanna. So this sea mountain essentially creates a lot of structure where things can like sit on and fish can feed. And because there is a structure, currents can be pushed up, and it brings plankton and all sorts of diverse life into one area. So it's a really important fishing ground.
It's important. And so yeah, so just like you say, there's cold, nutrient-rich water from the bottom gets swooped up along the side of the seamount, right? And so that's really important because that has all the nutrients and it's got all the good stuff that all these fish and stuff want to feed on. And also it becomes an aggregate spot, which is why I guess like you'll find a lot of fish in that area. I just want to point out that you're getting fans from Seychelles. There was a comment saying, great conversation, and Seychelles loves Sheena. Do you have, by the way, on the off the top of your head, there's a question: what is the highest or deepest seamount? Would you be able to comment on that?
That is a very good question, and I am afraid I do not know. But they can go, they can be 100 meters away from the surface, or 200 meters generally. Generally, it's about 200 or about that much. But yeah, I wouldn't know, unfortunately. But I will do some research.
Yeah, now you know. You're getting a lot of love actually from your people, which is awesome. I think that's great that they're all. Oh, I think this must be family member Sheena Talma.
That's my mom.
All right, go mom. I love my mom supporting me as well. She's like, not at all subtle. It says Fatma divorce, so everyone knows it's my mom, and she's like, heart eyes and hearts and waves, and love you, mama. But yeah. So okay. So you're doing this deep sea work, but you've also done some other work around the Seychelles. Can you take us to the Aldabra Atoll? Tell us a little about this spectacular spot.
Yes, I would love to. So Aldabra, in fact, is the jewel of the Seychelles, I would say. So most people grow up thinking of Galapagos, if you like islands. We think about Aldabra. Aldabra is this area, essentially. It's one of the highest raised coral atolls, and which means it's made of like coral that's been sedimented over a very long period of time. And it's got this huge lagoon in the center. It's got a huge variety of fish species, birds, of turtles. There's over 100,000 tortoises, so Aldabra tortoises. That's more than the population of Seychelles, by the way. But there's only 95,000 Seychellois, and it's 100,000 tortoises on that island. It's fabulous. They've got flamingos, dugongs. It's, for me, Aldabra, I've been very lucky to go there. Very few people have the opportunity to go there because it's protected, and sometimes to ensure that protection, you need to limit the interactions between humans and that area. But for me, one of the biggest things is that my first dive in a sub was around Aldabra, and I was blown away by the quantity of fish in that area. And there was this big grouper, a potato grouper, and it just kept coming up to the sub. It was really curious. So Aldabra's, like, if anyone asked me where I'd love to live forever, it would probably be Aldabra.
Nice, but there's no people there, is
Yeah.
there?
There's a small group of people that live there to maintain and do research on the island, and it's managed by the Seychelles Island Foundation. So Aldabra is also a World Heritage UNESCO site. We have two in the Seychelles. Aldabra is one, and the other one is the Vallée des Mai, and that's where you can find the biggest nuts in the world. They look like, they're called the Coco de Mer. Yeah, they're like two coconuts that's together like that. Very
It looks
cool.
like a butt, basically.
Yes, it's also called a butt nut by some people. But I think one of the things that Aldabra hasn't escaped, like the deep sea, like Dr. Diva said, was plastic. In fact, one of the reasons I was in Aldabra last year was as part of this really great initiative that the Seychelles Island Foundation and Oxford University came together and wanted to clear as much plastic off the island as possible. So they advertised for Seychelles to send in a video as part of a competition, and essentially 6 Seychelles who won the video competition went out to collect the plastic that was there. And all this plastic actually drifts from all over the Indian Ocean. And we managed to collect about 25 tons from the beach, from the coastline. Yeah, so, yeah, and of that, there was like 60,000 flip-flops, which is an amazing amount of flip-flops.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So wait,
Yeah.
so 25 tons over how many days were you guys picking?
We were there for 5 weeks, and it was a group of 12 people. But there was also, and then after that, there was, we're really, really fortunate. The Coast Guard of the country came down and assisted with the removal of the plastic from Aldabra. And a lot of it came back to Mahe, which is the main island of the Seychelles, where some of that has been recycled. As you know, one of the biggest issues around plastic is that it's really hard to recycle, especially when it's been in the water. But I think there were 60,000 flip-flops, but for me, one of the biggest things is that there was a lot of fishing gear. And that's, fishing gear, the problem with that is that it drifts around in the water and it catches things, right? So it never actually stops fishing. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So a beautiful place, and really one of the top places that I have ever been to. But yeah, not spared from the effects that we are having on our planet.
So how, just for, I guess, perspective, like how far is it from Mahe? Like, how do you get to Aldabra?
That's a great question. In fact, so the Seychelles in general, like I said, has 115 islands, and it's spread across a very large oceanic area. And the main island, Mahe, is about 1,400 kilometers away from Aldabra. So Aldabra is closer to Madagascar and the east coast of Comores or Kenya than it actually is from Mahe, which is our main island. It's a very large area.
Right. And so again, it's like what Diva said, these are remote places that, they don't really have people, right? Like there's a handful of researchers and people looking after Aldabra, but there are no people like living, no villages or towns. No. And still we're seeing this accumulation of plastic or rubbish, right? Garbage, human kind of consumerism showing in these places. And just 2 things that you touched on, which I think are really important to emphasize. One is, just because people tell you to separate your plastics and, put it in the recycling bin, there's I think it's less than about 14 or 15% of plastic is actually recyclable, because a
Yeah.
lot of it is made, it's such low quality that they can't
Mm-hmm.
actually like break it down and make something else out of it. And that's really important for all of us to remember. So just because you put it in the recycling bin doesn't mean you're solving the problem. What really solves
Yeah.
the problem is not using it in the first place, right? And that's number
Yes.
1 point. Number 2 point is the gear you were talking about, the fishing gear. There's a
Mm-hmm.
term for it. It's called ghost gear, and it
Mm-hmm.
basically just kind of floats around in the ocean. So it's a big net that maybe would have broken off, or just got dumped in the ocean, right? Like left behind by accident, and then it just floats. And like Sheena says, it's like there's nothing to stop it from just fishing continuously, but there's
Yeah.
nobody managing it, so it's just kind of roaming around the ocean killing things, right? So that's another really important thing to think
Exactly.
about. And so this expedition sounds amazing, but I was reading up about your Aldabra cleanup, and I saw that like for to prepare for it, it wasn't just like whether you loved Aldabra, but you had to like
Oh
do
yeah.
fitness tests and stuff. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, we did. In fact, we were all enrolled in like a fitness camp for before we set off to Aldabra, because although Aldabra is beautiful, it also feels like it wants to kill you sometimes, because it's got these plants that grow around that area. You can really get lost in the area if you don't know where you're going, and they've got this really hard rock along the coast, and if you fall on it, you can really do some damage to yourself. And of course, it's far from everything. There isn't a hospital there or anything like that, which means you have to be really careful. And I think one of the other things is we were living rough, right? There was no toilets, no showers, canned food. So you really had to, it wasn't just about loving the place, it was based on different criteria, for sure.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I mean, it definitely does sound like you needed to be fit if guys were picking up, 25 tons in, that time, 5 weeks,
Yeah.
which is like, that's kind of a long time to keep going. And, it's not like
Yeah.
you're like, today's a holiday. It's like, nope, we're here to do a job, right? So you're like
Exactly.
plowing down, which is
Exactly.
amazing. And probably in like the hot sun also through the day, like working, which
Yeah.
is another
Exactly.
thing.
So that it like, I have never experienced heat like that. In fact, what's really cool is that you can see how hot it is by looking at the tortoises, and the tortoises would almost migrate to the shade. So you just see like streams of tortoises that you didn't even know were on the plateau or that area where you were working, and they just all be moving towards one area. Yeah, it's very, very, very cool. They would hide under little trees, or in fact, I think Nat Geo has done some photography around this, but there's a cave that they stack themselves into, like right on top of each other. It's ridiculous. And they just hide there until the sun goes down, and then they can go back out.
What
Really,
magic.
really, it's, yeah, mind-blowing place.
It's amazing. And there's a comment actually from Jackie, and she says it's a great sacrifice. So thank you for, going. And at the end of the day, yes, the Aldabra Atoll is a part of the Seychelles, but it is a World Heritage Site. It's something that we all kind of inherit in some way or form. And
Exactly.
it is
Yeah.
it is our responsibility and duty to make sure that other people get to enjoy, right? And so what you did allows for that, because that, I mean, I guess that garbage had been accumulated for a fair bit of time as well, right?
Exactly. And I think one of the biggest things is it's great to do these expeditions because you learn a lot from them, but they're meant for awareness raising reasons, right? It's to be able to see, guys, this is what we're doing, but actually what we need to do is turn off the tap. The right way to go about it, the most effective, not the right, the most effective way of doing it is actually making sure that our own consumption is reduced to the best of our ability, and to put pressure on people that are producing the plastic, and try and make changes that way. And also what's really important is rivers and oceans are connected. If we're dirting our rivers, it's going to come into our ocean as well. So we have to remember that it's everyone's responsibility at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I always say, people say all roads lead to Rome, but actually all waterways lead to the ocean, right? Like that's the bottom
Oh, that's
line.
great.
And
I like
uh,
that.
TM, that's copyrighted. Okay, anyway, keep going. But I always say that because it's so true, right? Like,
Yeah.
every waterway dumps out into the ocean. So that's how I make people realize that you can live on a mountaintop and you may never actually get to the ocean or see the ocean. And I hope most people in the world actually have that privilege to go see the ocean. But if they don't, even,
Yes.
like, you have that impact, all the way down into the oceans. And
Yeah.
so that consciousness, and when we talk about marine conservation and protecting the ocean, it isn't just about the people who live in the coastal communities. It's really educating everybody about that
Exactly.
ecosystem.
Exactly. And in fact, if you think about it from a fishery perspective, right? So the fish that's fished here in the Seychelles or in the Indian Ocean or anywhere else goes to some of the craziest places. Tuna is a really big fishery, and that goes to parts of Europe and Asia and wherever. And that means that it reaches people in cans sometimes that live in a mountain. So we are connected. So
Yeah.
what we effectively we need to be are responsible consumers in everything that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so in your video, you had
Yes.
there was a moment where you had all those black tip reef sharks in the shallow
Oh, yes.
waters. That's pretty, like, I'm just gonna say that's kind of magic. I was like, oh my gosh, so many. They're so beautiful. But what's going on there? What were you doing? Tell us.
Yeah, so basically, actually, this was part of my honors study, and I never got to see the black tip reef sharks. I only saw that video the first time, right? Because my supervisor, I went to him because I absolutely love the work he does. His name is Dr. Paul Cowley, and he tags species with a tag so you can kind of find out where they go. And I approached him in my third year. I was obviously a super eager student, and I wanted him as my supervisor in my honors year, and he was like, sure. And I said, my stipulation is that I want a Seychelles project because I wanted to learn more about the species within my own ocean. And he was like, sure, but it's going to be a desk topic. I was like, it's fine because they had already collected that data. So he showed me all these cool videos, and I was like, I'm never going to get to go to Aldabra. And then, 2 or 3 years later, I was sitting in that same spot where that video was taken, and those sharks, black tip reef sharks, were swimming around me. And I started crying at that moment because there was like, it's like a picture perfect time. It's like the sun setting in the background, black tips around you, and then remembering the fact that this mentor, had given me the project. And yeah, and I learned so much about sharks at that moment, and really fell in love with the role that they have to play within our ecosystems. And yeah, so basically that's that video. And the black tip reef sharks, what we wanted to look at was where were they going essentially. So a study had been done in the 1980s that used spaghetti tags, which are these tags that you can see on the top of the fin. And this one looked at putting a little tag in the belly of the shark. And then you've got these receivers. If you think about it, they're like signal posts. And then every time the shark goes through it, it pings. So you can tell what shark has passed through it. And then you measure it so you know whether it's male or a female or a juvenile. So yeah, it was a really great first experience to ichthyology and the real science essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, so you know what I'm gonna say. I also have a confession. So my honors thesis as well in my undergrad was on sperm whale acoustics.
Ah,
I had never seen a whale when I did this. It was a desk study as well. I spent hours listening to their vocalizations. I was like so into it. I just loved it, and I actually thought I was going to go down the path of sperm whales, but got a bit distracted with blue whales, and now we are also doing sperm whales, which is convenient. But I also only saw my first whale, which happened to be a sperm whale, about a year after I finished my thesis. So,
yeah.
I actually think that's an interesting point because I think I often have a lot of students who come to me wanting to work with us who really just want to go out in the field, and that's kind of their primary objective. And then if you're like, hey, no, but I have like, writing stuff and some cool data to look at, they're not as excited. And I think what people don't realize is, you got to fall in love with every aspect of it, right? And I certainly was very excited to just even listen to this data, right? Like I was literally in university in St. Andrews. There was a bit of a mix up on my project, and then eventually I managed to get this project, and I was in this dark room with all these computer servers. There was no windows, right? And I'm like, and I'm sitting there on this computer, and this was some time ago, so it was a bigger computer, and I just sat there hours on end, right? I was fascinated, and the data is where we unravel the mysteries, right? Like, so seeing that site is magic. I'm not gonna lie, like being able to witness it, right? But like, also you would have had such a much bigger appreciation for these species and sort of what they're doing, and you weren't just looking at them and being like, sharks are swimming. You were like, oh wow, like connecting the dots, right? Which is cool.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the really important points you raised there is the fact that, sometimes it's not all about going into the field. There are different aspects to any kind of science degree, and if you want to go into research, which I think sometimes we kind of forget, the field is fantastic and it's fabulous, but it's also about being able to communicate what we saw out there in different formats, in a format that we can share with our colleagues so that, they can use in their own research, or in a format where we can inform other people or just, the general public or kids, or get anyone excited about, about what we're studying.
Yeah, I totally agree. So there's so many components to that, and I think every aspect is incredibly important and cannot be understated, cannot be undervalued. And I tell people, like, being in the field is amazing, right? Like, obviously, but you're just collecting data, but the data means nothing, right? Like, seeing 6 blue whales is like, it's amazing because you've seen 6 blue whales, but like, what does that all mean? And so that's why, like, the computer time and people's imagination of like our jobs is in the marine field are like that we're like, like basking around all the time.
Mermaids.
I know, right? With these like flapping tails and like maybe a fresh coconut in our hands and like all this. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. I often like am sweaty and grimy, and I've got sunscreen because like I'm in this exposed heat, and like it's all kind of running down your face. It's usually in my eyes. And my field team, some of them are online, and they're probably laughing because every day at some point I'll be like, oh guys, and they're like, what? And I'm like, I got some sweat and sunscreen in my eyes, and they're like, oh, okay, why is it that all of us on the boat, but you're the only one who does it, right? But that's the reality of the job, right? Like eyes are tearing, you're kind of like peering through, but I mean that's what it's all part of it, and it's none of it's glamorous. It's just it looks. We love it so much, it feels glamorous, and that's what it is, right?
Exactly. And
crazy.
Sometimes the work only starts. If you're doing genetics, and I've done some genetics, and it's about just getting fin clips, which sometimes is mind-boggling. When I was looking at the genetics of bonefish, which is this other type of fish we find in the Seychelles, really important for fly fishing, so it brings in a lot of money. And I got my poor parents were on board, and they would, because I was in South Africa, and they were here, and they were the ones who could collect samples for me, except for when I came for holidays. So, they were recruited, and they would call fishermen and find out if they'd caught any bonefish, and keep it in our freezer. So it's, sometimes it's doing that and then taking it to the lab and spending a lot of time in the lab, and you just have to appreciate each step, because each step really equips you with a different type of knowledge, but skill set as well. And I think that's one of the things that I've learned the most is when I first started the genetics journey, I was like, I don't know why I'm doing this, because it's really hard, especially if you've never done it. It's really hard, but you have to like stick with it. And, the messaging and the kind of information you get from it is really, really powerful. But again, one of the biggest aspects out of this is that you need really good mentors around you. And both my supervisor, who again was Dr. Paul Cowley, and Dr. Jessica Glass, are very good teachers and people that really appreciate the science and want to build people's characters. So I think for anyone out there who wants to study or want to go into research, just make sure you pick really good supervisors. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Totally. I'm
Yeah.
150% with you. I also want to do a 2 thumbs up to Mama Talma who's online, because I tell you, parental support. I mean, my parents have had to do a fair bit of things. Like my mom, once she took me to see a stranded sperm whale, and this sperm was like all its kind of or blubbery stuff was like rubbing on me, and then she was like, I can't take you in the car, and I was like, no, but what are you gonna do, like wearing, but you know, like she braved it and let me come in the car. They've transported poo samples, kept them in their freezer, so you know what, like yeah, like it makes a difference, like having that support for sure, but support comes in different forms, and
yes,
that's the key thing to remember, right? I think it's so important to look out for the people who are supportive, and that's what it is. There's always going to be at least one person who wants to support you, but be open to whoever that is, right? And you never know where they'll come from. Totally. And definitely, and with the mentors, find a great see, your mama's blushing apparently. And also there was a message from some friends of yours in South Africa, and they're like, they want you to come back, so just FYI. So okay, so I mean, I can talk to you forever, but I want to also and ask you questions and be excited about everything, but I'm also gonna like ask people if you have any questions out there, do type them in. I will crane my neck like this and try to read as they go past. I'll keep chatting. It is we've been talking for just under 45 minutes. Time flies when having fun. But so we can give it another 5 minutes maybe. So if you have questions, do ask, because this is your opportunity to meet a real life ichthyologist who's incredibly passionate. And I mean, that's the thing. I think there are people who do these jobs, the same things as we do, but I think some people just bring a lot of passion to the space. And if you love communication and if you're passionate about it, then you're going to make that difference and want to like tell the stories because you want more people to appreciate,
to get us excited.
And that's sort of like the kind of diseases we want to spread, right? Like this excitement for ocean type. Maybe that wasn't the right word in this
the pandemic, but I totally
you were just gonna make it worse. It's fine.
I was stop.
I love it. Okay, so while we're waiting, so you did a little bit of work with eDNA, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about it? Because I think that's a really like it's a pretty new thing, a new science, new area, new tool. I'd say new tool. And I think it would be nice if you could tell people what it is.
Yeah. So my work really, the first like kind of genetics I got into due to my supervisors was next generation sequencing, which essentially means that it's newer. The sequencing that has been in existence for a very long time is the ones where you can target. Okay, so it's either mitochondrial, which means that it's DNA from your mitochondria, which is you actually get that piece of DNA from your mom, or nuclear genetics, which you get inside the nucleus. Okay, so for me in the beginning, this made no sense whatsoever. But essentially, the next generation sequencing enables you to sometimes sequence the whole genome, so the whole section of the DNA. And they have done that for some species. And that's where I actually started. And eDNA, I haven't done a lot of work on it. We collected some eDNA samples recently on a Maldives expedition with weight. And essentially you collect water. And in the water, there's bits and pieces of animal remnants, right? Whether it's scales or whether it's like the salivary like stuff you see on some fish or some fishes, or bits and pieces of animal that you can then sequence, or even bacteria that you can then sequence and find out what's been in that area. So it's a really great tool. It's still being developed to find out kind of if I take a water sample and then I filter it, what's in that area, what lives there. So some really great questions, some really great research coming out of that.
Yeah, super exciting. It's something I would love to, a tool I'd love to apply here. I've got tons of questions. I mean, in fact, to be fair, there's lots of tools I'd like to apply, right? Like so many
Yeah.
exciting pathways to go down and things to discover. Okay, so we have a question, and actually, it's a really nice one, I think, for us to sort of wrap up on, because it's a very reflective question. It's from Peekaboo Nadia, and she said, if you could write a letter to your younger self, what would be the main message you tell her about embarking on this career path?
Ooh, that is such a great question. I think for me, one of the biggest things was representation in science. So believing in yourself. And I think Asha and we've spoken a bit about this. And I think it's really hard sometimes when you grow up and you can't see yourself reflected in the scientists or people around you in the field you want to go into. And I know lots of people struggle with that. So for me, it would be like, stick with it, be confident, own the space essentially. And I still struggle with that. And I think it's one thing that I'm learning how to do. You have to own the space you're in, and really bring other people up along with you. So don't forget that, it's to always, be out there, make sure people see it, because there's someone else who is looking for themselves in a scientist or whatever, and perhaps you're that person. So I think that would be my letter, just to remind myself to, yes, be humble, but also don't be afraid to take up space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really fantastic advice. And I would say, you have a right to be there. And that's the thing, it's not,
Yeah.
it's not like, oh, you deserve to be here, or, oh, here's a little space for you. It's like, you have an absolute right to be there, and
Yeah.
you will be there, and I think that's so right. And don't forget to bring other people up with you. I think that's really something that we, kind of connected on. The
Mm-hmm.
first time I spoke to Sheena, which was really the last time I actually virtually chatted to her. You might not
Yeah.
think that, everybody. You might think that we've had a friendship of like hundreds of years, and that's kind of how I feel when I'm talking to you, which is really cool.
Because it's easy to
But
chat
I
to you,
think,
Asha.
because I love to chat. It's so easy to chat to you as well. Storytellers, I think that's what it is, right? But I mean, the first time we talked, you were on Necton mission. I was doing some consultancy work, actually on exactly that, on like the idea of how do we make sure that these big research expeditions that are going into countries that are not their own, how do we ensure that they're not just going in with their own staff from whatever country they come from, doing all the work and leaving without really being inclusive of the people on the ground, the scientists, the talent on the ground, and like how do they make sure that the opportunities are distributed to everybody who deserves to be there. And so I was consulting with Nexen on that, and then Sheena and her friend Jennifer, actually, they got the opportunity to go to Oxford and do some work there, some of the analysis and stuff. And it was really great because we were connected at that point and we had a chat.
Yeah.
And it was just nice, even for me, like I do look around the space and I fight for it every day, like representation and inclusivity and diversity in marine conservation. And so when I find people, particularly who are excited and are really owning the space, and I can see like everyone's growing and just we're doing so much, and it makes me feel there's a sense of home, I think, which is nice. And a sense of, yes, you know what, we're going to do this, we're going to change the tide, we're going to be the ones who push the boundaries. And I think that's something that I love, and I'm so grateful that that's something that you also we come together on. So but I mean, I think really fantastic. Okay, so now at some point in the next 5-10 minutes, we'll start to pick us out. So I don't want that to happen. So but I do want to say this has been fantastic. I've loved every second. And I want to say, thank you so much for making the video. Thank you to Sister Talma for helping make the video. We actually in our office, we were particularly impressed with this. So
That was
nice
all my
touch.
sister.
Yeah, good job. But if for those of you who haven't watched Sheena's original video, which is under 4 minutes, and it just talks about what is ichthyology, and I think it's so fun. If you know any young up and coming people who want to go into the field and who are like, oh my gosh, what can I do in marine biology? That's a great little video that kind of gives you a sense of the diversity within the diversity, and I think that's what's fun. I would encourage you to also just go check out all the other Tiny Desk adventures that we've had, that we're going to have coming in. We've got amazing people who are willing to give us the time and be here and show. One thing is, I always talk about this relatability, where all, these are real people who have real stories to share, and they're really excited to share. And I think that's really nice, and it's infectious, and that can set you up for your week, for your month, for your year, whatever. And so just keep watching, keep following Oceanswell. Our social media is Oceanswell.org. Go to our events page on oceanswell.org for all the stuff we have going on. We have so much stuff. Sometimes we don't even know how to fit it into our social media. So we're kind of like battling with that right now. But thank you for being here, everybody. Thank you so much, Sheena. It's been such a pleasure for me.
Thank you for having me. And yeah, I really, really love the initiative and this Tiny Desk experience. I think, yeah, I can't wait for the next episode. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Sweet. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us, and stay tuned for more. Lots of fun stuff. You're getting lots of heart eyes and lots of thumbs up of hearts, by the way. So I think that means it went well.
I think so.
All right. Thank
Asha.
you, Sheena.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.